Hi, come on in. Sit down. For week 7, the text covers intrinsic theories of motivation. And I would like to do an alternative here. This theory, intrinsic motivation is good, and we need to study that. But sometimes the job itself's just not any good. It's not motivating. There are a lot of bad jobs out there, especially in manufacturing. So Hackman and Oldham are two researchers who came up with what they call job enrichment. And it focuses on the characteristics of the job itself rather than intrinsic motivation. So some jobs are just simply not motivating, and every job has a motivational potential or a motivating potential, and it differs from individual to individual. So this is a subjective approach to this, but it can be calculated. In other words, a score can be calculated for motivation, and we can come up with a motivating potential score for every job. Now, also, I want you to make sure you have a piece of paper and a pen or pencil handy where you can take a couple of notes, because I'm going to have you think through an example here. Okay, let's look at the theory itself. In their theory, you can see on the left, there are core job characteristics, and they have these 5 areas that they look at. Skill variety, how much of a person's human potential is demanded by the job. Task identity, how well a person is able to identify with the end result. Just giving you a good example, when I was young and first hired into an automotive plant, I was put on an assembly line and I was running a screwdriver on taillights, and they just looked like red, taillights with red lenses, and I didn't know anything about them. And then after I'd done that job for about a month, I learned that they were Cadillac taillights. So suddenly, I felt completely different about the job, because I was making Cadillacs instead of just putting screws into metal lights. So task identity improved once I learned what I was making. Task significance is how important a person feels the work is. Once again, it's subjective. It's up to the person, but sense of importance is part of, and you see on the right, the psychological state. Those 3 together are indicate the meaningfulness of work. Now, in this formula, we're going to quantify these. We're going to add those 3 and divide in order to get a score for meaningfulness. All right, then the next one is autonomy. How much freedom does a person have on the job to make decisions, to leave the job, to take a break, or to go to the restroom, or to get a drink of water, or something like that? So it's, in a sense, it's responsibility to go about doing the job your way, and that's a powerful motivator. It stands on its own. It's not factored in with anything else. And then feedback, and is knowledge of the work results. How do you know that you're doing a good job? And same thing, feedback's very powerful motivator. It stands on its own. So now what we have is the elements here for a formula. And the outcomes, if we look at this, high internal work motivation comes out of meaningfulness, high growth satisfaction, high job satisfaction, and high work effectiveness. These are the outcomes delivered by the 3 psychological states put together. All right, so now let's look at a formula. we're going to use a Likert scale from of 1 to 7 for each variable in the formula. I'll talk you through it, and I want your scrap paper for this. Notice the maximum scores will be 7 times 7 times 7, so 343 is the maximum score you can have, so that would be a highly motivating job. The national average in the normative data collected by Hackman and Odom was 128, and you can see it was based upon 6,930 workers in 876 different jobs. And many jobs exist that score below the national average. I've seen jobs all the way down to 7. They're just horrible jobs. I think the worst one Hackman and Odom talked about was a secretarial pool, where they would report to a room with nothing to do and wait for a manager to come and ask for secretarial help. They would pull them out and then give them work. So pretty boring job. All right, let's apply this. All right, in this first part, I want you to think of a job that you performed once in your life that you did not like. You considered it to be boring or certainly not motivating. I can remember, for example, when I was real young, I did a painting job, and I used to hate that job. And it was boring. I didn't like anything about it. So I want you to think of a job, and as you think of this job, I'll ask you the questions, and then on a piece of scrap paper, I want you to write this down. So question number 1 would be, in terms of skill variety, how much of your human potential did this job demand? Where number 1 would be very, very little. 7 would be very demanding. It took everything you had physically and mentally to do it. So think of the number that applies and write that number down. Okay, then for the next one is task identity. How easy was it for you to relate to the end result? Or were you like me in the beginning with when I assembled taillights, I didn't know what they were, so it had been pretty low. I knew they went on cars, so it'd be like a 2 or a 3. And then after I found out I was making Cadillacs, so I went up to, hey, this is different. It's like a 6 now. So on a scale from 1 to 7, task identity. And I want you to write that down beside the skill variety number with a plus sign in between, because we're doing the formula here. And then the third one, how important did you think the job was? How important did you think this job was? So for me, when I first started doing the taillights, it was not very important. I'd say like a 2 or 3. Once I found out it was Cadillacs, hey, that's a lot more important. It was like 4 or 5 then. So write that number down on a scale from 1 to 7, and then draw a line under them and put the number 3, because we're going to average those. All right, so then the next, how much autonomy did you have? Like, for example, when I was on assembly line, I had very little autonomy at all. I could not leave the line. It ran all the time. The only time I could leave was when someone came to relieve me. So it'd been low, been about a 1. So how much autonomy did you have on your job from a scale from 1 to 7? Write that down. And in the formula, notice there's a multiplication sign between them. And then feedback. How did you know if you were doing a good job? Now, my feedback wasn't too bad on this assembly line. It would be about a 4, because there was back in those days, there was an inspector at the end of the line. They examined every part. So if I made a mistake, they found it right away and they would tell me. And it didn't take very long. There was just maybe a minute in between making a mistake and finding out. So on a scale from 1 to 7, how did you know if you were doing a good job? All right, so now we've got the formula. So you're going to take the first 3 numbers, add them up, and divide by 3, and so you get a number. And then you're going to multiply that times the number you selected for autonomy, and multiply that times the number you selected for feedback. So The very worst job, if you did ones for everything, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 um, would be the lowest score, I guess, here. Um, if you did all sevens, it would be I think 343. The national average was 128. So what was your score? And I'd like for you to circle your score because we're going to come back and make a comparison to it. And I'm assuming your score should have been pretty low. All right, so now for part 2, I want you to think of a job that you performed that was very motivating. And if you've never had a job that was motivating, then what's an ideal job? What's your dream job that you're preparing for now? Think of it. And skill variety on a scale from 1 to 7, how much of your mental and physical skills are needed to do this. So you want to write that number down. Task identity, how easy is it for you to relate to the end result of what you're doing? On a scale from 1 to 7, write that number down. And task significance, how important do you think this job, how important does it feel to you? And on a scale from 1 to 7. And if you want, go ahead and add those up, divide by 3 so you get an average. Then how much autonomy, how much control do you have over going about doing this job? On a scale from 1 to 7, write that down. And then feedback, how do you know if you're doing a good job or not? Write that down. Now we're going to multiply those 3 scores. And you should get a number. And now circle that number. And compare that number to the job before. And probably what you're going to see is that there's a higher number on this motivating job than the one that was not motivating. And so my point here is that sometimes, no matter what we have going on inside of us, the job itself is what determines the motivation. So you compare your scores, and would your performance be more motivated and sustained on the higher scoring job? And I think most of us would say yes. And then compare your scores. How does it compare to the national average? Did any of you have a low score, considerably lower than 128? And no wonder you're not motivated on that type of job. And then the closer you get to 343, highly motivating job that demands all of your skills. Now, another thing that we can do as consultants, we can run this formula with employees in an area and get each employee's scores. They'll vary some because it's subjective, but then if we average out, say you have 30, 40 employees in an area and you average it out, you're going to get a pretty good indication of the MPS for jobs in that area. And if you find that the jobs are really bad jobs, then we can look at improving the jobs as a strategy for improving motivation. And the way we would do that, notice it says combine tasks to form larger modules of work. Now I'm not talking about job enlargement. I'm talking about increasing skill variety where say for example in job rotation, it's more demanding because they do different jobs, but it's not enlargement. They're not doing more work. They're just doing different work. And it also helps with task identity because they rotate through all the jobs from beginning to end. Focus on areas with weak scores in the MPS. So task identity, task significance, feedback. Oftentimes feedback is poor. I remember one time I was working with a leaf spring manufacturing plant, and the business was good. They expanded an area on third shift where they would assemble leaf springs, and they didn't have enough torque machines to check the torque, so they would assemble these, store them, and then the next day on first shift they would torque them. And all the employees, they were motivated. Everybody was pumped up. We were outperforming everybody. Third shift was the most productive shift, and which is unusual. And then one day, after about 2 weeks, we came in. We found out everything that we ran the night before was bad. It didn't pass the torque conversion test, and so that meant now, as the people were assembling leaf springs, they didn't know if they were any good or not, and there was no way to know until the next day. And so productivity went way down because they kind of had the attitude, what's the point if they're not any good? So we had to improve feedback if we were going to keep productivity high. You can make work self-paced instead of an assembly line. Maybe you have a unit build, which gives people more autonomy and they're more motivated to produce, or expand boundaries. So there's different tactics that can be done to improve the motivational factor of a job. I think the best strategy is teach the theory to the people, have a workshop with the workers, and have them brainstorm ways to improve these jobs, because they're good at doing that. So job enrichment, it provides a systemic approach to motivation. It looks at the job itself. I like it. Hackman and Odom said, in absence of theory, managers tend to overestimate the importance of the individual and the interaction. In other words, they blame the individual. It's kind of like, I would be standing around, I'd hear managers complaining about somebody on a job, so if they could just get rid of that person, everything would be great. And so that person finally transfers. They get a new person in, everything's great for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, what are they doing? They're saying the same thing about the new person. That's always an indicator that it's the job's the problem. So we move from blame to building employee commitment and empowerment with this theory, and that's a pretty powerful shift. This is a classic book now, Hackman and Odom, written in 1980s, called Work Redesign. It's paperback. It could probably be picked up pretty inexpensive. So this is a theory about jobs, and because sometimes jobs are the problem and not the motivation of people. And not only that, it's a very good theory for consultants because it has an implementation or an intervention strategy built into it. Thanks.